Hello, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Joree Rose. I'm so happy that you've tuned in this week. This whole month, we've been talking about mindfulness and meditation. And more importantly, I'm really hoping to not just talk about it, but to try to impart why does it matter? And as I've recently relaunched the podcast and I'm putting each month together in a theme, why am I choosing to do this as the second theme that I am hoping you're getting a lot out of? But the reason that I've really delved into this in the beginning of this relaunch of the podcast is because I find it to be so absolutely foundational in giving context, giving language that I consistently use and talk in the tools that I teach. But really, if you're here, I'm assuming it's because you're wanting to change something in your life. You're seeking growth, perhaps in your own journey or in your relationships. Perhaps you're here because you need to do some healing work. And this is a great adjunct to working with a therapist or a coach. Maybe you're on a journey of transformation and trying to discover who you are and have deeper insight and understanding into the patterns that you've been doing for years, but you're recognizing perhaps aren't working for you anymore. Or maybe you're here because you're feeling super stuck. Something's not working. You're not sure what it is, but you're determined that the next 5 years won't look like the previous 5 years. And I'm hoping that not only this podcast, but the podcast community that I have created and is growing and building, which my heart is so full from, is a supportive component to your journey. And if you aren't sure what the podcast community is, check out the link in the show notes. It is a way for you to take these episodes and go deeper with them. I have associated meditations and, more importantly, a handout for each episode that will guide you and prompt you to integrate these tools, to implement shifts and changes and new awarenesses into your day-to-day life, because learning is never a one and done. And if you join the premium membership, which, by the way, it's very reasonable, $22 a month. And 22, by the way, is a very spiritual number about enacting spiritual awakening. And so everything is very intentional in how I've organized this. But within that premium membership, you also get a live call at the end of each month to help answer questions, get more insights, be in community with other like-minded women. So if that speaks to you and it would be supportive in your ongoing journey of growth, healing, or transformation, again, we can welcome any member at any new time. So check out the link in the show notes for that. But I'm really wanting to stick with a certain theme each month so that we can go deeper. We can peel back those layers. We can identify different aspects of different topics and not just rush through things that our culture so easily does. I'm really hoping that with each episode, you're building a deeper foundation to heighten your awareness, to increase insight, curiosity, self-compassion, to help you identify those patterns. If you didn't listen to any of the previous episodes, check out the ones in April, in which I talk about the cycle of reactivity and the unalome as that visual, that roadmap for understanding where you get stuck, but most importantly, how to get out of it. The reason I am so passionate about these tools, these practices, and making this a foundation for anyone's journey is because it so closely is tied to my own journey. I could not be where I am. I certainly would not be where I am if I did not discover, because I didn't seek it out. It really kind of fell in my lap through a series of serendipitous events. That will be the topic for another episode. But it literally fell into my lap and I followed the breadcrumbs that the universe was giving me. And what it gave me was a framework and a set of practices that I could do each and every day that kept me in that path of greater awareness. But okay, why does awareness matter? Here's the crux of it. I didn't know who I was. I was living my life on autopilot. I was stuck in my head. I believed my thoughts. I wasn't really certain of why I was doing what I was doing. Not that I was doing anything wrong. I woke up one day and I just didn't feel aligned in myself, mind, body, spirit. I felt disconnected from myself. I trusted my thoughts more than my own intuition. That did not always lead me to making the choices that helped me feel most authentic. In fact, it was the opposite of authenticity that I felt. I felt like I was more susceptible to influence of others' thoughts because I didn't have a secure sense of self. Now, there's a whole lot of other reasons for why that was the case. But when I talk about mindfulness and meditation being the foundation, because truly, unless we slow down and we get out of our head and into our bodies and begin to learn our patterns and understand and gain insight into how did we get here? Only then can you consciously be able to create the path going forward. I don't see any other way, because in that path is healing. Because I know there is no one who gets out of this life unscathed, whether it's capital T trauma or an accumulation of lowercase traumas, those lowercase t traumas. Even if it's just one tiny thing that has derailed you from questioning your relationships or your values or your path in your life or the direction in which you're heading, or in how to be a better parent or a better partner, or how to go about making choices so that you're ultimately happy, not by the external things you're buying or achieving, but the internal happiness that comes only from within. We get there by becoming familiar with ourselves. I've heard many times from different meditation teachers that a meditation practice is a practice of remembering, a practice of coming home to yourself. What does that even mean? Coming home to yourself? Well, it's remembering who you are before all the shit happened, before you got influenced by people who maybe did not have your best interest in mind, before any of the traumas, capital T or lowercase t, affected you that prevented you from feeling safe or secure, before the things happened that shut down your authenticity or didn't allow you to feel safe in your own vulnerability, before you felt you couldn't speak your truth because someone didn't agree with it. So we get unconditioned from being connected to ourselves. We become people pleasers. We self-abandon so often in favor of connection with others, only to find that that connection doesn't always feel great. Well, if you're self-abandoning in favor of connection, how could it ever feel good? This is why it matters. It's not for you to just have something else to add to your to-do list of a 2-minute meditation in the morning, or, mindfulness practices that will help you stay present. That all is really high level, but I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of this actually matters. And I'm guessing you're here, like I said, because you want to create some change in your life. And unless you know where you are and how you got here, I don't really know how you can authentically get to where you want to be. This is why it matters. This is the foundation of the roadmap. This is the way that we get to uncover, but discover the parts of ourselves that we've tucked away, we've been afraid to show, we have felt insecure or incapable or not strong enough or not smart enough, whatever it is that has been holding you back. We're here to set that down, put it aside, say that that mindset no longer has space in our lives because it is preventing me from being the truest, most authentic, self-expressed version of myself that I've ever been. Now, that's way easier said than done, and that's okay. I am not attached to the outcome. I'm more interested in the journey. Now, just as in this name, Journey Forward, I just want you to get unstuck. I don't care how far forward it is. It could be a quarter of an inch, but it's movement. It's not being stagnant in your life. It's finding yourself so you have the courage to make a change, which, by the way, is incredibly courageous. Making any change is incredibly brave because it means you're breaking the status quo. You're saying, I'm no longer available for the way things have been, even if it's been that way for my entire 47 years. Or I'm no longer available to do what others want of me just because I'm concerned they might get upset. I mean, there's so many layers to this, and that's what this whole podcast is about. And I'm also really excited with this relaunch, even though now it's been a few months that I've been back to it, because I am an incredibly different person than who I was when I started this podcast about 6 years ago. I thought I had gone on that healing journey to the point where I found myself, and I was definitely on that road. And I'll share more of that story over time. But specifically, the past 2.5 years have broken me down, cracked me open, and put me on a healing growth and transformation that I didn't see coming. I never thought possible. And the only way I could have gotten through some of those really difficult times was to get still and was to rely on the practices that I knew would support me in getting through. The only way out was through. So I'm not just teaching this from a place of, oh, these are really important practices. They've been around thousands of years. Western science backs it up. Here's what's happening in your brain, which, by the way, I'm going to tell you a little bit of that today because it still is important information. But I'm here in full authenticity to be able to say to you, I have broken down all of the mindsets, the patterns, the habits, the expectations, the self-judgments, the expectations others have had on me, not just ones I've had on myself. I'm no longer available to live by somebody else's rules. Now, that doesn't mean I've got to be destructive to my life and blow it all up. It just means I'm ready to get to know myself. I'm ready to be curious about where I've been living on autopilot, where I've been asleep, where I have been anxious, where have I let that fear and anxiety rule my decision-making? Where have I been playing small because I've been over-attached to other people's opinions of me? I can honestly say, if I didn't have these tools of mindfulness and meditation, I couldn't have done any of that. So hopefully that inspires you to have the teensiest bit more curiosity within yourself of where you are, how you got here, and where you want to be. So what are we talking about today? So much of today is the theme of get the fuck out of your head. And I say that with a lot of love, a lot of compassion, without judgment, but with a determination to let you know that so many of us, and maybe you're the anomaly here, and that's great, and I support that. However, I see it day in, day out, and I still get stuck in it myself. I'm not immune from it. I've just got a bigger muscle built around it to notice when I'm there. We got to get out of our heads. So if we're in our head, what does that mean? It means we are over prioritizing our thoughts as the things that we hold on to as truth. So let me let you in on a little secret. Your thoughts are not your truth. Period. Mic drop. We're done here. If only it was that simple. We are not our thoughts. In fact, the brain produces between 50 and 70,000 thoughts per day. That's a lot of fucking thoughts. We tend to believe them, a lot of them, and I'll explain why in a second. We tend to over-attach to what we think is rationality, to what we think is cognitive because we live in a culture and society that values fact, but our fact that we often hold on to may not be our inner truth, our inner wisdom based on our intuition or our values. We get stuck in a negativity bias. This is one of the ways that our brain is designed. So I just said we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day. And our brain has been wired in a way to keep us safe for survival's sake. So we have a negativity bias, which means that our brain is going to overfocus on the negative because that negative is going to prevent us from overfocusing on this thing that could not keep us safe. So think back to when we were cavemen. Okay. This is how the brain got wired. If there was 10 fish over in the sea that you could go catch and feed your family or your village, or if there was a bear in your cave, which one would you focus on more? You'd probably focus on the bear in the cave because that was a threat to your survival and your safety. And it wouldn't matter if you could catch the fish and feed your village if the bear was eating you all first. So the modern day analogy of that is if you're given 10 compliments or 1 criticism, what are you going to focus on the most? You're likely going to focus on the criticism. You're going to easily slough off all the positive things someone said about you, partly because our inner critic is kind of a bitch and we have a hard time thinking good thoughts about ourselves. We're going to over-attach to that criticism. We're going to have a hard time not believing that one to be true, but we're going to over-focus on it partly as a motivator to not feel that way again. Well, when we do this, we are literally Velcro to the negative and Teflon to the positive. And those are the words of Dr. Rick Hansen, who does amazing work in the combination of psychology, neuroscience, and Buddhism. But that's what's happening inside of our brain. So we have all these thoughts because of a negativity bias. We're going to over-attach to the negative ones, which are going to say things to you like, you can't change. That'll never happen for you. Don't even bother trying. It's never going to work. You're not going to be able to stick to it. All of the things that we think all the time, we easily get stuck jumping on that train of thoughts. And that train then leaves the station, flies off to the distance, and we don't know how to jump off that train. It's a habit. It's familiar. We know how to do it. So having that awareness that you are not your thoughts are not your truth. If it's rational, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. In fact, that was one of the key factors in my origin story, in which I made decisions based on what I thought was fact. And if it was right on paper, I thought it was right for me. But I had plenty of experiences which something seemed logical and rational and the right thing to do, where I could logically say that this was the right choice. But you know where I got stuck in? There was a nudge inside my body that didn't feel aligned with what looked right on paper. All the boxes could be checked, but my heart and my gut didn't agree. And that was the foundation of how I made a lot of decisions for a lot of years. And guess what? Ultimately, those decisions did not serve me. But I didn't know how to trust my intuition, to trust my gut, to follow my heart. I followed what I thought was the right thing, which was the rational, logical thing to do. Which also makes sense because thoughts come from the logical part of our brain. So I'm going to give you a little brain science 101, as I like to call it. Perhaps this is a refresher for you, but it's really important because I think once we understand and have deep insight into how our brain is wired and how it works, we have a much better ability to know what to do with it. And it doesn't have that much power over us. So in the center part of our brain, if you're watching the video, I'm touching if you're not watching the video, I'm touching my hand to the center part of my head, right on top. The center part of our brain is where our emotional brain resides. Well, let me back up 1 second. If you touch your hand to the back of your neck at the base there, that's your reptilian brain. That is our least evolved part of our brain. That's where we just have pain or sensation, right? You touch a hot stove, it's going to burn. You learn the lesson. It's reptilian because there's not a lot of evolved thinking there. Okay. The center part of our brain at the top is our emotional brain. And we have an alarm there. It's called the amygdala. It's like a little alarm that when our emotions go off, that is where we experience them, is in the center part of our brain. At our forehead, right, prefrontal cortex is our most evolved part of our brain. That part of our brain is not fully formed until our mid-20s. This is why teenagers tend to make stupid decisions, because the rational part of the brain, the logical part of the brain, is not fully formed. So it's not entirely their fault, though we can teach responsibility around that. But that logical part of our brain is where all of our executive functioning resides. So what does that mean? That prefrontal cortex is where we have logic, reason, rationality, decision-making, clear thinking, language, communication, learning and retaining information. So what is the reciprocal relationship between our emotional brain and our logical brain? Well, when our emotions are calm, we can easily access all of those tools that reside in our prefrontal cortex. Okay, makes sense. So you're calm, you're having an easy day, you can easily make decisions, you can access your logic and reason, you can be able to communicate really clearly. You don't have brain fog, things are flowing quite well. It's like a 4-lane open highway with no traffic. However, when your emotional brain fires off, gets activated, that alarm sounds, that amygdala gets activated. And that 4-lane open highway gets down to a 1-lane country road with traffic. All of a sudden, we're stuck. You cannot access those tools. So what does that look like? Well, if you're angry, right? So your emotional brain is angry, you can't communicate clearly, so you say things you don't mean. If you're stressed, you can't make good decisions. If you're anxious, you have brain fog. If you're nervous, you forget stuff. So think about that in your day-to-day life. This is important information because we got to understand how we can also quiet down that emotional brain. I'm going to get to all this and tie it all together in just a moment, but this is still part of our Brain Science 101. When that emotional brain fires off, what also happens is it puts us into fight, flight, freeze, because our emotional brain is experiencing a threat to our safety. And chemicals and hormones get secreted in our body that help us protect ourselves, right? So that bear is in the cave, and it's going to help us run or fight the bear, put us into fight, flight, freeze, or we even now can go through a fawning experience. That could be like a real people-pleasing experience in relation to our survival strategies. All of this is going to make it really hard to make decisions. If your emotional brain is constantly activated, if you're in chronic stress, if you're chronically overwhelmed, it's going to be really hard to settle into your own intuition. You're going to be spiraling. Think about the cycle of reactivity. You're just going to keep spinning. You're not going to be able to get out of those patterns, to be able to think clearly, to even get out of your head and into your body. Because the only time we can do that is when our emotional brain quiets down. And you can enter into the rest and digest. The parasympathetic nervous system kicks on. All those hormones and chemicals that got released quiet down. And now your body is able to be present. And only from that place can we be able to even tap into our intuition and access our tools and resources to not just make logical choices, but to have a full mind-body connection experience. So this is important information because when we get stuck in that spiral. We talked about the Udalum, we've talked about the cycle of reactivity. If you haven't listened to those episodes, go back to some of the ones in early April. But when we get stuck in our head, we are cut off from the neck down. So we've got to be able to recognize not just the patterns what we're in, but be able to understand, why can't I even access my tools? And only when I can access my tools, then I can be fully present. Then I can come into a place of more authenticity and be values driven and be intentional. Because if my emotional brain is reacting, then I'm just being impulsive. There is no intention anywhere when our emotional brain has taken over. And the good news is we can actually rewire our brain to create new habits and patterns. And we'll talk a little bit more about that another time. I've got some great analogies for that. But for today, I want us to understand, when we get stuck in our head, all of that stuff is going on, which makes it really hard to create new patterns, to develop new ways of responding to that emotional reactivity. So we've got to quiet down what's in our mind, allow our tools to get back online so that we can be embodied. This is what meditation does. Meditation is one of the ways to quiet down that emotional brain, get all of our executive functioning back online. Think of it like you're trying to get online, but the Wi-Fi's gone out. Meditation is like turning our Wi-Fi back on, where you can access yourself. You can't access yourself if you're constantly spinning. So I'm hoping that this makes sense. And I'm hoping you can see that we need to build that foundation of meditation to be able to quiet it all down, to even listen to what's inside of us, to tune into our intuition, to pay attention to that nudge that you're feeling the universe keeps tapping you on the shoulder. If you're stuck in that spiral, your emotional brain is the one at the control panel of your brain, and you're not able to make clear decisions because you can't even drop in. You're on constant survival mode, looking at high alert for the next potential threat. There's no way you can be mindful and, authentic in a response if you're constantly on a lookout for a survival strategy. This is something that, when I put this all together and understood that when I learned how to meditate and my brain quieted down and I was able to access my tools for introspection, creativity, problem solving, curiosity, I couldn't do any of that when I was anxious all the time, when I was stuck in fear. I didn't know myself at all. I was so stuck up in my head, but really stuck in that emotional spiral of my brain. Meditation, as I talked about earlier a couple of weeks ago, that first meditation I ever did, I thought I was going to die. I didn't know what to do with the stillness. But over time, that stillness became my friend, because I discovered that is where my true essence resided. Who I was outside of the expectations placed on me by others, expectations placed on me by myself, outside of my story of the traumas, or outside of my roles in my relationships. Who I was, me, is who I discovered when I was able to get out of my head, quiet down that emotional brain, not let it take over. Allow myself to not be in survival mode, to not be hypervigilant, to be able to feel safe in who I was. This matters. And so when you're looking to create growth or healing or transformation of any kind, we've got to begin to tap into who is the me underneath all the chaos. underneath all the anxiety, the overwhelm, the only way I can find her is to slow down and get quiet. Now, that's not to say it's easy. It can be extremely disorienting when we've never practiced that before. But it's really, really important. And we know that the best way to quiet down that emotional brain is to breathe. That breath is going to literally activate the rest and digest part of our brain. And we're going to be able to think clearly. And we're not going to reside on all those old patterns. And it'll ironically allow us to feel more trusting of our intuition. So that's why it matters. And I'm going to go to some areas of when we practice these tools, some foundation mindsets to adopt when wanting to be more mindful, because these again are all the ways to have to shift our thinking or get to shift our thinking so that we can get to where we want to be in our life. And some of these might be things you already do. Some of this might be what you already conceptually know how to do, but this is the reminder. Because remember, slowing down, connecting with your breath, meditation is a remembering. It's coming back into yourself outside of all of the things. Who are you underneath it all? It's an invitation to become familiar with yourself, maybe for the first time ever. So when we're being more mindful, what is it we want to practice having a mindset around? Well, some foundational tools is the practice of non-attachment. What does this mean? It means I get more overwhelmed or anxious if I am over-attached to how something in my life turns out. So this feels paradoxical because I'm working towards something, but yet I can't be attached to the outcome. So it's about cognitive flexibility. It's about having the ability to set an intention rather than a goal. And I love that distinction. It's actually a little argument that my ex-husband and I used to get into. But an intention can be fluid. An intention can be based on your values of how to be values driven moment to moment in your actions and decisions. A goal might be an arbitrary destination that you've set for yourself that may or may not be attainable, that may or may not be based on the route markers that you've set for yourself. And with a goal, if we don't meet it, even if it's an arbitrary goal, it can be easy to have the feeling or belief that I failed, I'm not enough, I suck at this. And so I don't like setting goals because it goes against this idea of non-attachment. Let me be facing in the direction of my desires rather than be over-attached to getting to my destination. Because really, the journey is what's more important, as we do know. Non-attachments are really hard when it's an ongoing practice, but the more we strive and cling to a particular outcome, the more we set ourselves up for failure and have an increased chance of suffering. This is some of those foundations of mindfulness that the Buddha uncovered while sitting under the Bodhi tree when asking the question, how do I reduce my suffering? How do I become happier? Well, stay in the present moment. Don't be so over-attached to outcomes. That's not to say you can't care about them. I've got some examples of that, but I'll save those for another time to, I'll go into this one right now. Practice of non-attachment. I once was at a conference. It was a wisdom conference. And throughout the 3-day conference, they had about 5 or 6 monks do a sand mandala. And this mandala was a table that was about 6 feet in diameter. And this was a meditation for them. They did not talk. And it was like basically a paint by numbers. And they had a placement of a different color sand of different parts on this mandala. And it wasn't just like flat sand, that the tool that they were using could even create dimension within the sand. So some of it was higher than others, maybe like a 0.5 centimeter high. And this took them 3 days to create this beautiful sand mandala. And as soon as they completed it, they did a ceremony on destroying it. where they swirled all of the sand together, thus disrupting what they just spent days creating. Well, right after I was at this conference, my youngest daughter at the time was about to turn 9 years old. And it was her first birthday she had had since my ex-husband and I had gotten divorced, since he had moved out. And I was tucking her in bed at night. And she asked me, she said, "Mommy, what are you doing tomorrow night?" And I knew why she was asking. It was because she was having a birthday dinner with her dad and his side of the family, which we would do every year for one of the birthdays. And she said, "I want to invite you to come to dinner tomorrow night for my birthday. I want you to be there." And I said, "Oh, honey, I don't think I was invited." She said, "Well, I just invited you." And my heart started to break for her. And I saw the look on her face. And I said, "Well, love, things are different this year. It's not the same as it's always been." And I started to talk to her about the practice of non-attachment. Mind you, she was turning 9. And I pulled out the video of the monks at this ceremony of destroying the sand mandala. And I was trying to teach her that she had to be flexible, that this year things were going to have to look different. We can't be attached to the way it always was, because if we over-attach the way it always was, we're going to be more disappointed with the way things are, rather than accept that things change, that there is impermanence. And she instantly looked at me and she said, "How are you expecting me to not be attached to my family?" And I just thought, oh man, she's my teacher. I aptly named her that. Her middle name was Sage. And that doesn't mean it's easy. But if she, every single birthday thereafter, was upset that it's not the way it used to be, she would suffer every year on her birthday. And yet, what do we do with that? Well, one of the other tenets is acceptance. How do we practice acceptance? Well, I always talk about, because a lot of my clients will say to me, "I don't like this." And my response will come into a practice of acceptance. And the question is, well, how do I accept what I don't like? Well, not accepting whatever is arising doesn't make it go away. It only makes your reaction to it bigger, which is going to increase your own suffering. So here's the reminder. You don't have to like it to accept it. You just need to stop fighting it. Because so often we are in resistance to what we don't like, and it increases our suffering. All of this makes it harder to create the change that we're seeking. So, to be present, to practice non-attachment, to practice the art of acceptance, to know that there's impermanence. The most constant thing is change. And another core mindset to practice here is a practice of equanimity, radical acceptance. It is what it is. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean you like it. It simply is not fighting it. And if you're in the podcast membership, I have a great article on equanimity I'm going to put in this week's handout. So be sure to look for that. It is so much easier said than done, but this is like building new muscles around these beliefs. It's really hard to create big change without adopting some of these beliefs, because inherently we're going to have to lean into discomfort. And how do we let that be okay? How do we accept what I don't like? How do I let go of what's no longer serving me? All of these are practices. And you can recognize if your emotional brain fires off and gets angry in resistance to any one of these things, you're going to be cut off from the tools that's going to help you to get through it. Right? So you can see how this is all coming together in practice so that we can get out of our head and out of that spiral. Right? Getting out of your head is another way of saying getting out of the spiral, because it's where we spin and we don't have access to our tools. And we want to be able to drop in a little bit deeper. But where are we going? Well, we're going inside of ourselves, where I know your authenticity is inside there. I know your intuition speaks truth to you, but you're over attaching to cognitions as fact, and you're dismissing what your body's messages are saying because we're not in a habit of believing those to be true. But I don't know. if you look back on your life at any of the nudges the universe has given about an intuition, I'm going to guess at least with 90% of the time, your intuition was spot on. Maybe it wasn't always 100% accurate with what you had to be aware of, but if it said to you, something's not right here, my guess is something wasn't right there. And why do we not pay attention to that nudge more of the time? Because we're relying on logic to tell us, but logically, everything should be fine. Should being a key word in that sentence. Don't, one of the things I like to say is stop shoulding on yourself. So, part of this is having the awareness of the patterns that we're in, which is ultimately what I've been talking about for months now, is increasing that awareness. But having a lot of compassion for why we're so stuck up in our heads and why we get stuck in that spiral, why the emotional brain does what it does, why it cuts off access to our tools, and why is it so darn hard to drop into our body and our breath, which is going to allow access into the core of who we are. So I want to wrap up with a couple of things. Is we tend to have beliefs about what we think is possible. And I have found over the years that people have a handful of myths about a meditation practice that prevent them from engaging further. Things like, I'm not good at this. Okay, why wouldn't you be good at meditation? Well, because my mind wanders too much, or I get distracted, or I can't sit for that long, or I get uncomfortable. Okay, well, let's just say you've never done this before and we're building a muscle to do something you've never done quite in this one way. So one of the myths is, I'm not good at this. There's no such thing as a bad meditation. The only quote bad meditation is the one you don't do. But no one's judging you if it was good or bad. It's really about, did I create the space for stillness and silence to get out of my head and into my body, to connect with my breath in this present moment, to allow whatever's arising to exist without judgment? It's as simple, but not as easy as that. To say, I don't know how to meditate. Well, there's no how really other than connect with your breath. Find something to focus on. Maybe it's your breath. Maybe it's something you see in front of you. Maybe it's a walking meditation. Maybe it's what you hear. Maybe it's touching your thumb to your fingertips as a practice for focus and attention and putting your mind's attention where you choose. We learn as we go. We're building that muscle. But I want to keep reiterating the why are we doing this? Is because that stillness, when we quiet down all of the noise in our head, what begins to emerge is our inner wisdom. And the more we create the space, the more room our inner wisdom has to come to our fruition. And the more we see it, the more we can begin to believe it, to trust it, to honor it, and to give it just as much credit as you would a checklist of how to make a decision. I don't have anywhere to meditate is a myth that people have often said. Do it in your car, like I talked about last week or the week before. I don't remember which one. A meditation is simply an intention to be still for a moment, connecting with your breath and body. You can do that in line at the supermarket. You can do that while sitting in traffic. You can do that for 10 seconds before you sit down at your computer and open up your email. Another myth is, oh, people in my life don't support me in this. Well, they don't have to support you in it because they don't even have to know that you're doing it necessarily. But some people might find that the more you connect with yourself, they might find that threatening because maybe you might learn things that might disrupt the patterns of way things are. That's hard. And that's also not your work necessarily. For some people, they believe I can't meditate because my thoughts won't stop. Well, guess what? I just told you you have 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day and they might not stop. But you know what they will do? They'll slow down a little bit. But what will stop is your habit of jumping on board with each and every one of them. What will stop is your belief that every one of those thoughts are true. What will stop is the habit of over trusting those thoughts versus your intuition. Having thoughts is being human, and that's fine. But the more you practice awareness of those thoughts and observing them, with your feet firmly planted where you are in observation of what's coming up for you, the less power they have over you. Sometimes people say, I can't meditate because I'll fall asleep. Okay, well, you can maybe start by sitting up if you happen to be doing it lying down. But if you get sleepy, that might be an indication that your body's actually really tired and maybe needs a little bit more rest. So that's good awareness to have. If you get too distracted by your environment, look at it as I'm trying to build a muscle and it's not built yet. And maybe in the beginning, it's really hard. You look at every noise or every sound, but you can begin to practice not getting caught up in your distractions. When you get a text, practice taking a few breaths before you open it. That helps with your impulse control and our distractions. Some people believe they have to meditate first thing in the morning for it to be a valid time of day to practice it. Nope, meditation can happen anytime, anywhere, no matter what time of day it is. Some people think, oh, meditation doesn't work for me. Well, if there's no wrong way to do it and we're not attached to any outcome, then there's nothing that's not working. All we're doing is slowing down and connecting with our breath and allowing whatever is arising to exist and practicing not judging it. When we can do that, it allows us to be much more intentional in every area of our life. Non-judgmental awareness will help us in every area of our life. So there's nothing that doesn't work for you. It just simply means you haven't built that muscle. Some people say, well, I don't feel calm or zen-like or peaceful at the end of a meditation. Well, if you were attached to that being the belief of what happens, then that likely might not be the outcome. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's comfortable. The practices can be lean into the discomfort. In fact, one time I was at a day-long retreat at Spirit Rock, which is a beautiful Zen center in San Francisco. And Jack Kornfield, who's one of the great mindfulness and meditation teachers of our time, was teaching. And he had opened it up to questions. And someone raised their hand and he said, I get really distracted when I meditate. What do I do about that? And Jack Kornfield has a very dry sense of humor. And he put his hands in a prayer pose and he started bowing down. And he was bowing down to distraction. He said, distraction, distraction, distraction. Thank you, goodbye. Like he honored it, acknowledged it, and let it go. Someone else raised their hand and said, I get restless. He did the same thing. He bowed down to restlessness. Restlessness, restlessness, restlessness. Thank you, goodbye. So a lot of meditation is uncomfortable, but so often we let discomfort stop us from doing something that might actually be good for us. And if we're practicing meditation as the foundation for a mindfulness practice, so we can live our life with that same level of non-judgmental awareness of what's arising, so we can become more intentional, so we can tap into the highest version of ourselves without all the excess noise, right? That's what we're trying to do here. A lot of that's going to be uncomfortable. So if we're looking for the easy path, well, the easy path is to stay asleep in your life and ignorance is bliss and not growing or changing. This is actually hard fucking work. I never said it was easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. So the more we can trust that when we practice leaning into what's hard, we get through to the other side where it's a little bit easier. Now, sometimes people, say I don't want to deal with what comes up for me because it's, it might be trauma, it might be too hard. And I get that. And so we want to make sure that we're getting support if we need support in things. This is why, therapy is wonderful. Coaching is wonderful. If you're in the podcast community, you get this inherently when we do our live calls on the premium membership. I just want to keep reminding you that this is the foundation. We've got to allow ourselves to get uncomfortable. That is where the growth happens. We never grow when we're comfortable. Think of the lotus. Why is the lotus the symbol for meditation? Because it grows in the mud. We can often hear about post-traumatic stress, and this is what happens after a traumatic experience. But you know what else is possible? post-traumatic growth. That's where we're taking what's hard and we ask ourselves, what was I here to learn from this? Why did I go through that? What was the lesson I needed to learn? And we're open and curious to learning those answers. And then we have the courage to enact that change. And part of this is about taking accountability for yourself and your actions. When we have greater awareness of ourselves and we stop externalizing not only blame to others, but our happiness onto others and have more accountability, we feel more empowered to create the change that we're seeking. One of my favorite stories in understanding some of these foundations of mindfulness is this idea, this Buddhist notion of the first dart and the second dart. The first dart is what life throws at you. It's the curveballs. It's the things you didn't see coming. It's just the shit that happens as being human. The second dart and every subsequent dart thereafter are the ones that we throw at ourselves, asking, why did that happen? Why me? Why this? Why now? What's wrong with me? We think our suffering comes from the first dart, but in actuality, our suffering comes from the second dart, which means it's not what happens, it's how you're relating to what happens that impacts your experience of what's happening. So when we can have greater awareness, we have a greater ability to look at our own reactions and get curious. It goes back to the cycle of reactivity. The cycle of reactivity is what's causing our suffering, not the trigger itself. We've got to have greater awareness and greater accountability to get out of those habits and patterns so that we can get on the path of greater alignment, greater authenticity, greater peace, greater abundance. This is what I'm here to guide you in. I'm not perfect at this, but I've been building this muscle and it's gotten me places I never, ever, ever thought I could get to. It truly is the only way I can think of moving through life, because staying stuck, externalizing blame, not taking accountability, not being responsible for my own growth and healing, I can't think of another way to go through life. We have this one precious life, and we are not role modeled or conditioned to know how to teach these things to our, we aren't taught these things. We don't teach these things to our kids. We're learning. And with these foundations, we're going to get there. So I hope that this has been helpful in understanding why we want to get out of our head, out of that spiral, because in our head is where that emotional brain has taken over. Only once we quiet down that emotional brain, we can drop into our body, our heart center, our gut, our intuition, which is really where our inner wisdom and the inner truth resides. We can break those patterns that are no longer serving us. And most importantly, when we quiet down all the noise in our head, we can start listening. What does my heart want? Who am I outside of all that noise and chaos? What does being in alignment have the potential of feeling like? Or if I feel that, how do I stay there? What does being authentic mean to me? This is the why. So I invite you to get curious. If you have any resistance to practicing meditation, if you have any resistance to creating change, just get curious. What's the resistance about for you? What's underneath that? And look at any of those myths that maybe I named, maybe you've got some of your own. I invite you to make note of that. And ask yourself, are you giving yourself the opening to have a new belief about how to create change in your life? I love this quote that a belief is a thought you've practiced. It's simply a thought that you've practiced. And are you ready to practice thinking a new thought, a thought that's in alignment with not only where you are in this present moment, but where you want to be, what you're working towards in that growth, healing, or transformation journey you're on? Or is the thought that I've continued to practice become a belief that is in the opposite direction of my desires? Because that is the place to start. So I really hope that you found at least one thing to take away from this episode, some resonance and understanding how our brain works. When you have greater awareness of that, you've got greater ability to get unstuck from it, greater ability to notice when that emotional brain is taking over, greater ability to access those tools. Think of the emotional brain as being that cycle of reactivity when you're stuck in the spiral of the unalome, and getting your tools back online is working your way out of that unalome, is getting into your responses, not your reactions. And it's only from that place can you truly be in alignment with yourself, get to know yourself, get clarity on what it is that you're seeking. And from that clarity, you get to heal and you get to have deeper self-compassion. And that journey is so much more beautiful because that alignment, man, that's the work I do on myself constantly. And that's the work that I'm here guiding my clients in. So I hope that this resonated. I hope that you found at least one or two things to take away. Again, if you're not already in the podcast community and you'd like to get greater guidance in the integration and implementation of all this, check out the link in the show notes. And if this resonated with you, thank you so much for not only listening, but for continuing to support the journey forward in yourself and others, and to help support that, a rating, a review, a share, wherever you listen to podcasts, to help support it so that others can be on the path that you want to get on as well, to greater alignment, greater authenticity, greater happiness, less suffering, less attaching to outcomes that aren't serving you, greater connection to yourself so you can be in greater connection to those you love. Thank you so much for tuning in. I so appreciate you being a part of our community, and I look forward to continuing to journey forward with you. Be well.